how do we take advantage of our power and our resources as a community? First, it goes without saying, but it has to be said. وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. So, as a starting point, a fundamental building block for us and our belief system as Muslims is the yaqeen and the conviction and the certainty that, first of all, glory, victory, power, dominion, authority, all of this is a rizq, and it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He gives it to whomever He pleases, and He takes it away from whomever He pleases. And it's a test, and in some cases, it is a tremendous honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever we as a community feel defeated, feel powerless, feel hopeless, understand that the antidote, the medicine for this is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any human being who tells you they have power and if you follow them you will have power is a crook and a tyrant. And there are many of these throughout history. And by the way, our Muslim lands are not immune from these types of crooks. So understand fundamentally that power and izzah and glory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why you're seeing one of the, on paper, one of the poorest places on earth, with one of the most densely populations on earth, with some of the least educated people on earth, with the highest unemployment rate on earth, with no military, with no organized resources, with no ability to even control their own water and electricity, teaching the whole world a master class in resilience and strength and conviction. And you see entire superpowers trembling and terrified, trying to manage their security apparatus around the world, fearful of this next threat from here or from there, and living in this constant paranoia and anxiety. And no matter how much power they have, they always feel that that power can be taken away and snatched from them at any given moment. And this is also true of politicians. Now, there are two big myths I want to untangle today. The first myth is that we as a community, I'm talking now as a Canadian Muslim community, that we are weak, that we're powerless, that we're not organized, that we don't have resources. Many of us are immigrants, we're struggling to make ends meet. So I'm not going to give you opinions, I'm just going to share facts. There was a study done that was published in 2022. So this is a year and a half ago. And it was a study that was done about Muslim charities across Canada. And this study revealed the following information. There are approximately 400 registered Islamic charities in Canada. And in 2018, they collectively, so all 400 Muslim charities, were able to get over $500 million of donations. In other words, Canadian Muslims every year donate $500 million to Canadian Muslim charities. And by the way, this is an underestimate. The number is actually bigger than this. And that's because this study only looked at registered Muslim charities that had the word Muslim or Islam in their name. There's a lot of Islamic charities that don't have that in their name necessarily. Also, it didn't cover certain provinces, etc. So the real figure is even larger. But take at its face value that it's $500 million. The Muslim community in Canada numbers in the 2021 census 1.8 million people in Canada. So there's 1.8 million Muslims in Canada. The Jewish community, for example, has 335,000 Jews who live in Canada. That means that for every one person in Canada who identifies as a Jew, there are 6 people who identify as Muslims. So from the perspective of growth, this community has grown tremendously in the last 20 years alone. In 2001, the same year that 9/11 happened, Muslims were just 2% of Canada. Today, Muslims are more than 6% of Canada. In 20 years, we tripled our population in this country. So
when we say we're weak, what do we mean by this? If we're saying we don't have enough people, well, this can't be true. Because there are communities that have way less people who don't look in the mirror and say, we're weak, we're hopeless, we don't have any authority or any power. They're able to mobilize and leverage their abilities, despite, in some cases, being fewer in number or having fewer resources. When we say we don't have money, well, what do we mean by that? Because our charities alone, remember, this is donations given to charity. Everybody here, I am sure, gives money directly to family back home. Not by going to Islamic Relief, but by wiring money, Western Union, whatever. On top of that, you go to the masjid and you give a sadaqah with cash. That's not recorded by that particular transaction. On top of that, you travel to US cities, and when you go there, you give charity. I'm telling you, the real number is so vastly larger, but if you just start from the point of $500 million, this is a very significant amount of wealth that this community has. So the question is our problem really that we don't have wealth and we don't have enough people? Or is our problem that in fact Allah has blessed us with numbers and has even blessed us with wealth, but we're not organizing ourselves, uniting ourselves, and leveraging these resources in a way that is strategic and effective? And I want to go back once again to understanding where and what unity means and defines for this community. We have seen throughout history, from even the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslims were very few in number, their biggest asset was not money and it was not numbers. It was their unity and their conviction. This is what allowed them to band together and overcome impossible obstacles, and overcome impossible odds, and overcome impossible adversaries. When you think of, for example, what happened in the Battle of Badr, and I know I've said this before, but just imagine for a second, today, any major Fortune 100 corporation would never, in a single airplane, send their CEO and their CFO and their COO and their chairman at the same time. You know why? For insurance reasons. For succession planning reasons. Because what happens if some emergency happens with that plane, or there's an accident and the CEO passes away? You can't have your entire leadership team on the same plane, putting all of your metaphorical eggs in one basket. There was a disaster that happened, a few decades ago with a number of Russian diplomats that all were on the same airplane, and there was a tragedy there, and it was widely, criticized globally after, of course, people gave their condolences for very poor planning and very poor strategic thinking. So understand that in any context, to take very valuable, heavy-hitting resources and put them all in a place where they can be at risk is a huge no-no. And yet, look at the Battle of Badr, subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ went out to this battle. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu went out to this battle. Umar radiallahu anhu went out to this battle. 313 of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, who represented the majority of the entire Muslim ummah, went out to this battle. This wasn't let's sit back and calculate and look at the pros and cons and keep a contingency. This was, there is a red line that we as a community will not accept. You want to sanction us? Sanction us. But this is still our home. We're going to figure out a way to live. You want to prohibit us from getting food and water and resources? We'll figure out a way to make it happen. You're going to cut off resources to us? We're going to overcome this. But the moment you tell us we cannot live here and maintain our faith, no, Allah is more valuable to us than all of our property, all of our lineage, all of our inheritance, all of our possessions. And that's the point at which we're going to draw a red line. And so fundamentally you find that when a group of people are sincere with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have in their heart a conviction that while they are willing to try to be diplomatic, to try to be politically astute, there comes a point where you have to draw a red line. This morning, I'm sure everybody saw the ICJ ruling, right? The International Court of Justice on the case that was brought forth by South Africa against Israel on the charge of genocide, according to the Genocide Convention. Now, a lot of people this morning started saying, oh, but they didn't call for a ceasefire, etc. Let's take a very big step back and understand what's going here. A very small country that many of us here didn't know very much about, or at least didn't pay attention to, up until, a few months ago. A country with far less economic resources than many Muslim countries today, decided that it is going to leverage its background, its historical example in history, and its resources within its means to be on the side of justice. And what they did is so profound it cannot be understated. This genocide convention was established in 1948 after the Holocaust happened, and one of the primary signatories to this was Israel, precisely because of the notion that the Holocaust was this devastating thing to happen, and this should never happen again. So in 2024, for South Africa to drag the Israeli government and respondents and politicians and heads of state to The Hague in front of the world watching, to charge it with genocide and ethnic cleansing, in and of itself was such a catastrophic public relations disaster for Israel that alone was a victory. Understand, my dear brothers and sisters, victory comes from Allah, and victory takes many shapes and sizes and colors. And I'm not saying this means that the Aqsa is now liberated, but I am saying that this is a profound step. And this morning, a lot of people started saying, oh, but they didn't call for a ceasefire. We have to understand this injunction was an emergency preliminary ruling. And in no uncertain terms, the court came out and established very clear facts that any astute observer can draw the conclusions of. What did they say? They said that Israel must immediately prosecute any of its leaders who call for genocide. That same judge read out statements made by Israeli leaders who called for genocide, including the defense minister, including the minister of culture, including the prime minister. What is the implication? The International Court of Justice is calling for the prosecution of the government of Israel itself. This is pretty profound when you unpack it. Not only that, but they very clearly established that there are clear grounds of potential genocide, and they rejected the request of Israel to throw this case out. This is very meaningful. And this case did not end, nor did what the ICJ ruled this morning, was it the last word on the matter. There will be further and further prosecutions of this issue as we go forward. The point I'm trying to illustrate here is, when you are truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're truthful and you go for it, in whatever capacity or means or resources you have, you will find that Allah will give you power, Allah will give you a way, Allah will give you allies, Allah will give you support, Allah will give you victory. Meanwhile, you could be 1.8 million people who spend $500 million a year, and all you're good for is looking at Twitter and being upset that the minister of so-and-so just sent out a terrible statement, and the government this and the government that. What are we doing about this? I'm going to propose a solution. And I want to be very clear, what I'm about to say for some people may be controversial. What I'm about to say does not represent the opinions of the London Muslim Mosque and all of its representatives. I'm speaking on my behalf and my behalf alone. As a community, we have, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, this is not a fatwa, this is my personal opinion, we have an obligation as a community to inflict maximum political damage on Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party in this next election. We need to make this the red line that we show this entire country. We will not allow for a prime minister to tell us to our face that he cares about us, to write some bogus checks addressing anti-Islamophobia while saying that it is okay to continue slaughtering 30,000 people, 10,000 children, 7,000 women. This is not acceptable, and we will not stand for it as a community. Now, a lot of people in our community say, well, this sounds very great, but brother, this is a bit emotional. And also we have to think about what happens after Trudeau. This guy, Pierre, he's saying some really concerning stuff. He could be the next Stephen Harper. He could be worse than Justin Trudeau. So if we the logic goes, if we go after Trudeau and we as a community are responsible for taking down Trudeau, we will have inadvertently delivered to somebody worse than Trudeau a victory. Therefore, we need to be cautious in how we approach the Trudeau and the Liberal Party problem. Here's how I would respond to this, and it's not emotional. It's based on reason. It's based on basic economic concepts of game theory, and it's also based on our responsibility as believers. Who is the government of the country today? It's the Liberal Party. Our policy as a community is we will not stand for any government that undermines and undervalues the life of a Muslim. And whether you value Muslim life or not is not derived from the statements you give us, because the statements you give us are embellished speech. And with all due respect to politicians, your speech is the last thing that carries any credibility with anyone. It's your actions that matter. So you can tell us all day that all lives are equal and Muslim lives are important, and my best friend is Muslim and I love eating molokhia, and you can say all these things. But when your actions show that you belittle and denigrate and disrespect and undervalue Muslim life, we can see this very clearly. So whichever government is in power in this country that crosses this red line, we as a Muslim community have an obligation to mobilize. I don't care if you're NDP, Liberal, Conservative, or Green Party, or some other independent party. So this is a politically agnostic, nonpartisan policy that we as a community set the record straight on. Secondly, and I'm going to give a very basic example. Imagine that there's a child who's small, not particularly muscular, and there's a bigger child who's a bully who comes up to this child and corners him and is about to attack him. Now, imagine that there's an even bigger bully standing in the distance watching what's about to unfold. Now, the child here sees the dynamic. He is immediately being attacked by a bully, and in the distance, there's an even bigger bully that could also attack him. So what does he do? He has two options. He can try to, relent to the bully who's trying to attack him now and say, it's okay, and because if I make peace with this bully, hopefully the bigger bully will leave me alone. Or he can muster up his courage and say, I don't care what size you are, I'm not going to stand for this, and defend himself against this bully. Now, the bigger bully who's watching from a distance, when they see a little person give in to somebody who's an even lesser bully, now they know they can eat this kid alive. But if they watch this little kid defend himself, they'll say, you know what, even though I can probably overcome this kid, he's scrappy, he seems to be, pretty tough, and let me go find somebody else who's weaker to prey upon. The example I'm trying to give here is, we are playing the speculative game of maybe. Maybe there's a worse politician who will come, so let's accept the Fir'aun that we have right now. No, this is not acceptable. And the opposite is true. So if we take the example of, if the Muslim community punishes Justin Trudeau in the next election, and Pierre Poilievre, let's say, wins, do you know what message this sends to the Conservative government? It sends two very important messages. This is a community that has the strength and the ability to inflict political damage. And they can do it, and they did it. Which means this is not a community to easily mess with. Secondly, by punishing Trudeau, by definition, what did we do? We allowed the Conservative government to win. Now, maybe we don't want that to happen, but that is the byproduct of that happening. So the second conclusion the Conservative government's going to say is, this is a huge group of people and demographic, 1.8 million people across this country. Do we want to alienate these people? Or do we want to actually maybe present ourselves in a way that can be cooperative with this community, because it's a community that could actually be an important ally of ours? The opposite, however, if we as a community allow 30,000 of our brothers and sisters to get slaughtered, and children. And every single day, more and more horrifying things are being done. And our response is, yeah, but, it would be theoretically, hypothetically worse with a different government. Then we've just sent a message that we don't have red lines. We don't have red lines. I mean, if this is not the thing over which you will flip the table, what is? What is? Where's your red line as a community? Where are my red lines? If there are certain things that you just will not stand for, you must make that known and very clear. And this is the opportunity that we as a community have. And by the way, all of this would be true if we were small in number and ineffective in our resources. But the statistics I shared earlier indicate the exact opposite. We have abundant resources, and we are the second largest religious ethnic group in this entire country. We have the ability and the resources and the willpower to effect change. The second myth, and inshallah I'll wrap up now, the second myth I want to address in this community is this idea that it could be so much worse. What do we mean by so much worse? Let's take the worst era that many of us in our contemporary experience think we lived in Canada, which is the Harper era and the post 9/11 era. I ask you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was anybody here thrown in a concentration camp? Did anybody come here and, slice you down the middle, take a saw and cut you in half? Did anybody assault you or bomb your home or send precision guidance missiles into your neighborhood to flatten your entire neighborhood? Like when we say that it was so awful under Harper, I'm not trying to say otherwise. I understand it was awful. I'm also saying that our community tripled in population in the last 20 years, رغم أنف Harper. That's what I'm saying. I'm also saying that relatively speaking, we still have certain freedoms. During the December holidays, and I genuinely miss the community, subhanAllah, I spent a decent amount of time in Saudi Arabia. I went to Medina and I made Umrah, and I also spent some time after a very long time in Egypt to visit extended relatives and very, very unwell uncles and aunts. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them shifa and give all of our families shifa. And I'm telling you right now that there are Muslims in Muslim majority countries that can't even open their mouth. And if they open their mouth, there are genuine, lifelong, permanent consequences that they could suffer at the arbitrary whim of politicians and rulers who don't seem to have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts. So when you think of and when you say things like, oh, but the consequences could be severe, well, let's be clear about what we're saying. Because I'm not trying to suggest that there aren't groups of people in this country who hate Muslims. I'm not trying to suggest that. I know that. We've seen the devastating effects of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate in this country. I'm not undermining this. I'm trying to put things in perspective. Did we think we're going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without being tested? I mean, what are we looking for here? Are we expecting this utopian Canada or Jamaica or Egypt or Saudi or where everything is just wonderful and we all live happily ever after and we're not tested and everything's great and governments just do whatever we want and give us whatever we want? That's not how it works. We will be tested. Whether you're in Canada or you're in Saudi or you're in, wallahi, you will be tested. You're going to be tested in your health. You're going to be tested in your wealth. You're going to be tested in your life. You're going to be tested in your career. You're going to be tested in various ways by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to envision that your goal is to try to create a utopian Canada that is free from any kind of challenge or tribulation itself seems to misunderstand a fundamental concept in the faith. And that's not to say that we as Muslims, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. I'm not saying seek out tribulation. I'm saying it's the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will be tried and tested. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was tried and tested. The greatest creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was tested before he became a prophet. He was tested before he passed even through puberty. He was tested with the death of his father, the death of his mother, the death of his wife, the death of his uncle, the death of his closest relatives. He was persecuted. He was sanctioned. He was economically boycotted. He was made a refugee from his own home state. He was sent. He was persecuted. He was followed. Then he was fought. Then he was fought again. Then he was fought again and again. And all of this, tribulation, test, trial, one after the other. وَمَا وَهَنُوا وَمَا اسْتَكَانُوا. Right? There was no giving up. There was no ceding that conviction that so long as you are upon the truth, victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we, my dear brothers and sisters, have to get back to our tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. And whoever is conscious of Allah, fearful of Allah, Allah will bless them from sources they could not anticipate, and will make a path for them, will make a way for them to facilitate ease. So to conclude, my dear brothers and sisters, we as Muslims here in Canada have a very unique test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. And then you shall be asked on that day, the day of judgment, about your na'im. And I want to make it clear in no uncertain terms. We live in na'im. Compared to so many of our brothers and sisters around the world, Allah has given us safety, shelter, security, job, income, healthcare. Yes, we complain about this and that, and it could be better, but fundamentally speaking, what you have and what I have, automatically, just by having a Canadian passport, you already have 99% more resources than anyone else on earth. That's just a fact. So when we look at this na'im that Allah has given us, we have to put this in perspective and understand that a community that numbers 1.8 million, 1 in 20 people in Canada is someone who says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. 1 in 20. $500 million is just what we give to some charities every year. These are very significant resources. And so the question is not, how do we bring more people? How do we become wealthier? No, the question is, how do we unite who already exist? Is this the time for us to be talking about very basic questions around, should Taraweeh be 8 rak'ahs, my brother, or should be 20? Wallahi, akhi, I'm not praying with you, I'm going to that other masjid. Or, this is how we do this or how we do that. No, this is not the time. And this is once again not to say that Allah has created this beautiful diversity in our faith, and where there are sometimes more correct opinions than other opinions. But to make this the reason why you will not support your brother. How many Muslims do you know who tell you, Akhi, I don't like doing business with Muslims. I love doing business with everybody except for Muslims. Muslims, Akhi, you open a store and nobody comes and supports you. You tell people that you're looking this and people say, oh, mashallah, but then they go and they don't have your back. This is tragic. This is very tragic. As a community, we have to have a conviction that when we lift each other up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unites our hearts and lifts this ummah up. And this is going back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, and that's how I shall conclude, inshallah. We must, as a community, this is not an option, this is not a nice to have, this is a must have, and it begins with every individual in this masjid. Every one of us has to, in our hearts, always be thinking, ummah first. How do I put the ummah and the ummah's needs first? And what do I need to deprioritize in order to make that goal the number one goal? And how do I become an instrument for the unification of this ummah? And I'll tell you a very, very funny story, inshallah, and I'll turn it over to my dear brother Absar. When I was in my third year of undergraduate university, I was so upset and fed up with how disunited the Muslim community in Canada is. SubhanAllah, all these years later, and this is still something I'm talking about. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us unity and bless us, inshallah, and mend our hearts and not put ghil in our hearts towards ladina amanu. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with love for one another and fill our hearts with competitive, healthy competition for His sake, but cooperation for the sake of raising the banner of La ilaha illallah. Third year of university, I figured, here's an interesting opportunity to try to unite the community in Canada. Every year, we have, mashallah, 4 Eid days that we pray Eid. How does that even work? I don't know. There's the calculation method, there's the moon sighting method, there's the council method, there's following Mecca, and so on and so forth. So my thought was very simple. Let's bring all of the scholars and ulama in Canada together in a room and say, you decide what method you want to use amongst yourself, and let the community know what day Eid is. But let's prioritize the unification of the day of Eid, because the unity of Muslims is an obligation. And let's work out the details behind. You can decide, for example, that you're going to have a rotating program, that this year we're going to follow this method, the next year we're going to follow, Allahu alam. And I'm not here to say that I'm a faqih or a alim in this particular regard, but our scholars have resolved far more difficult conflicts. So we put together a group, and remember, this was not supposed to be a grassroots revolution where we're going to walk into the masajid and start demanding. This is a problem in our community. When we want change, especially younger people who are very energetic, you think that the way to change things is to flip the table and, put all the elders on the defense, in the courtroom. This is not the way to do it. This is not the way the Sahaba did it. This is not the etiquette of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? You have a grievance. There are etiquettes and ways to convey that grievance and to create opportunities for that cooperation. So, what we meant to do simply was to say, our dear beloved scholars, you know about this more than we do. We're just simply here to let you know that we as Muslims are so upset at how disunited we are in this regard that we wish you can solve this problem. And by the way, if we can solve this problem, this opens the door to so much unity in this community. Because we will have shown ourselves and each other that if we can resolve this issue, we can resolve many issues amongst ourselves. So I started going to different mashayikh. And I'm not going to mention names or name names or anything like that. Started going to different mashayikh, asking them. And alhamdulillah, there was some traction. A bunch of mashayikh started saying, Wallahi, mashallah, this is beautiful and we should do this and so on and so forth. Then I go to one masjid in a particular city and I leave a flyer with some information and I come home. The next morning I get a phone call. And on the other end is a very angry sheikh calling from this masjid. Says to me, Akhi, who are you? I said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Mohamed, and so on and so forth. Akhi, where are you from? What's your agenda? So, Wallahi, Shaykh, I don't have an agenda, but what I'm trying to do is this and this and that. Okay, Akhi, I understand what you're trying to do, and that's fine. And we're prepared to be united, inshallah. But as long as everybody does what we want to do. I said to him, well, Shaykh, unfortunately, that's what everybody's saying. And that's precisely why we're not having unity. So is it possible? No, ya akhi, wallahi, we don't. Oh, and which other masajid tayyib, akhi, are you talking to? I start listing some names. Akhi, we don't talk to those guys. Those guys are out of the millah, asasan. Okay, Shaykh, tab, what about? And before you know it, it was not to be. Now, personally, I have not given up. Not because I think this is easy, even though I think I was a bit naive and a little too idealistic. But because I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. It's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, if I commit the rest of my life to this project of i'tisam for the sake of Allah, and I fail every time, inshallah, at least when I meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'll say, Ya Allah, wallahi, I tried. But your servant so-and-so, wasn't happy with me and gave me a call. Forgive him, Ya Allah, but, this was my effort, this was what I tried to do. We have an obligation, my dear brothers and sisters, to identify ways in which to unite our banner and bring our resources and leverage them. And I know I keep saying this is the last point, but I promise, inshallah, this is genuinely my last point. And this is a point about leverage. In the title, I was very specific to use the word leveraging our power. Leverage speaks to the idea that you can, with very little, generate a lot of force, right? So as an example, look at the Israeli lobby, AIPAC. AIPAC spent $58 million last year in political advocacy, campaign contributions, and policy lobbying. To put this in perspective, there was a study that was just published by The Guardian a few weeks ago that showed that after October 7, every member of Congress who was pro-Israel and defended Israel no matter what Israel did, on average received $125,000 from AIPAC. And every member of Congress who was pro-Palestine in their position, on average received less than $20,000. And of course, some like Rashida Tlaib received a big fat zero from AIPAC. Now, think about this for 1 second. Some people in our community, because we're relatively new to this stuff about lobbying and advocacy, and inshallah we'll get to CMPAC, which is another really interesting organization, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and bless the work they do, to try to engage in more advocacy for Muslims within Canada. Appreciate the following. Let's just say for the sake of argument that AIPAC spends $58 million a year on advocacy and policy and lobbying. If you came to the Muslim community and you said, Ya Shabab, Ya Jama'ah, we spend every year $500 million on charity. By the way, do you know that half of the $500 million we spend every year on charity goes overseas to relief organizations, relief work? So actually less than 50% of the donations collected in Canada by Canadian Muslims are spent in Canada to advance the needs of the Muslim community. And of that stays in Canada, 90% is building masjids, parking lots, and schools. Do you know how much we spend on advocacy every year as a community? Less than 1%. Less than 1%. Now, if you go to the community and say, let's next year try to spend 10% on advocacy, $50 million. Most people will say, "Akhi, what are you talking about? What is policy, advocacy? All this stuff is hanak, and nothing happens, and it's all this and all that." Look at what AIPAC was able to pull off. President Obama, how many years ago, signed a 10-year pledge to give Israel approximately $4 billion a year. And after October 7, the Biden administration accelerated the passing of an aid package of $14 billion to Israel, unashamedly and unabashedly, primarily in the form of munitions and military aid. So, for those of you who are good at math and investments and return on investments, if AIPAC spent $58 million last year to lobby Congress to support campaigns and fund campaigns, resulting in an overwhelming support for $14 billion going to Israel, not from AIPAC, but from American taxpayers. Is that not a pretty good return on investment? And this is the challenge and the opportunity that presents itself to our community. How do we leverage our existing resources? The goal is not to say, how do we go from 500 million to a billion? No, we have 500 million. 500 million can move mountains. How can we leverage this wealth and these resources to maximize the long-term success of the vision of Muslims in Canada? Jazakumullah khair wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll answer some questions, but I'll turn it over to our dear brother Absar.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Brother Mohamed. That was amazing and very inspiring and extremely insightful to see the kind of potential Muslim community has in Canada and the kind of work we still need to do. And so we have to look forward to how we can leverage the power we already have in a way that we can shape the future for our community and for our global ummah in that sense. So there will be a question answer session, but before we move to question answer session, I would like to just present to you one of the events which is coming up inshallah in February, and quickly introduce you to CMPAC, which Brother Ashur was talking about, what it is and what this organization is. So, one second. So CMPAC is the acronym for Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. It fights structural Islamophobia by mobilizing the community, talking to politicians, influencing the decision makers and the policy makers, and it is a non-profit organization. And it works through community engagement, and it is solely driven by volunteers. So this is just a quick brief into what CMPAC is. I am one of the members of CMPAC, a newly minted member from London community. And inshallah, we are looking for, CMPAC is looking for volunteers, people who can spend a little bit of time in helping us engage with policymakers, engage with politicians in lobbying, for the lobbying effort. So that is just a brief introduction of CMPAC. So CMPAC with the MSA have announced that they are bringing Sami Hamidi to Canada. Just a quick show of hand, how many people here know Sami Hamidi? MashaAllah, good amount of number of people know Sami Hamidi. Sami Hamidi is a Tunisian British political analyst, and MashaAllah, he has been one of the most proficient orator of last few years, especially when the Gaza issue came. He has been one of the most inspiring figures I've heard in recent time. Do you want to quickly give a little intro of Sami? Yeah. And then I have two small clips just to entice you of the caliber of speaker he is. And then we will announce the date. You can see on the screen there will be a QR code. The event is completely free. You can donate to CMPAC through that link as well. But the event is free, but we do want you to register for the event so that we know the kind of venue size we have to accommodate all the people who have registered.
Just very quickly on both CMPAC and Brother Sami. So I have not had the honor yet of shaking his hand. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him for the ummah. Understand there's a big difference between somebody who speaks from a perspective of fiqh, because then you're talking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. You have to be very careful. There are rules, there's education, versus somebody who provides political analysis. So you may not agree with the political analysis of everybody you listen to, but there are some people that you come across that, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in your heart comfort towards them, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count him amongst the righteous in our ummah who are trying to be very sincere in objectively viewing and understanding and analyzing the geopolitics. And he does it in a very impassioned way, in a way that also is very holistic. He also seems to, mashallah, have a very strong grasp of the fundamentals of Islamic jurisprudence as it relates to political analysis. So he will often bring this into a lot of his speeches. And rather than waxing any more poetic about him, inshallah, you'll see in a second. But before that, I'll just tell you one other thing about CMPAC. Some people in the community, so for a lot of people, CMPAC is a new organization, Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. And a lot of people are familiar already with NCCM, right? The National Council for Canadian Muslims. And a lot of people are thinking, well, what is the difference between these two organizations? Isn't NCCM, mashallah, doing a lot of great work? We're getting all these alerts. They're doing all this great advocacy work. The answer is yes, and. So the argument that as a community, we should only have one single group advocating on our behalves or lobbying on our behalves is ludicrous. In the United States alone, do you know how many pro-Israeli lobbies and advocacy groups there are in the United States? 33. 33 just dedicated to lobbying. In Canada, we have, I said already, 359 charities registered in 2018. The number is much larger now. Of these, more than 100 are relief-related organizations. So the fact that we only have one NCCM, I wish we can have 20 NCCMs. And this doesn't mean you support one or you don't support the other. It means if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you, support this and that. And there's work that each of these organizations can do, inshallah, in maximizing the impact of our community. And again, understand that we will not always agree with every single thing these organizations say or do. And you will find yourself sometimes aligned, sometimes not aligned. The key you have to ask is, are the people behind it? What is their view of Islam? Does it align with your understanding? Does it align with your convictions of Islam? And are they acting on behalf of the community in good faith? And who are the people that are key decision makers and influencers in these circles? So with that said, inshallah, I'll turn it over to Brother Absar to perhaps play the clips, inshallah.
Let me know if you guys can see that.
That pressure has a difference. Don't undermine those efforts. You think it's significant, but in reality it's significant. You think that it's pointless, but Allah amplifies it and makes it worth it. And that's why, continue your social media. Go to your protest. If you haven't set up a coffee shop, or just set up Timberlands and you want to let me know about it, or just set up other items or other industries, go for it. Do it. The Ummah now has realized that we need these people, that we need to take that perspective. We need to mobilize forward. And ya ibadallah, learn about our merciful Lord. For wallahi, before Gaza woke us up, we didn't know about our merciful Lord. Because if we didn't, we would have mobilized earlier. Gaza has shown mercy on us. Gaza has reminded us that Allah has power. Gaza has reminded us Allah is ever present. Gaza has reminded us that Allah is the one who controls. Gaza has reminded us that Allah has all the power. Ya ibadallah, will you be a people who will forget this answer? That pressure has a difference. Don't undermine those efforts.
I'll play another clip of his, and then inshallah we'll move to question answers.
by your standards, never exceed the outcome. About those, Shu'aib goes to Midian, Allah destroys Midian. Goes to Allah destroys Nuh goes to Allah destroys him. I ask that anyone fail in absolute not the beauty of Islam, that it's you that makes Islam great, it's Islam that makes it great. You that makes Allah great, it's Allah great. When you come, there's only one moment that you come for. There was only one time that Allah was the ayah when you were deathbed, when you but you kept going, you kept striving, no stubborn. Went through the heartbreak, went through despair, and you said, I'm not going to be in this next time. I'm going to be the woman that keeps moving. When you hit deathbed, totally depressed, don't leave your body.
Could be for us.
What you say to the angels is, "Ya ayyatuha an-nafs." Oh, beautiful, beautiful soul. Oh, beautiful soul that kept striving. Angels, he never or she never saw the outcome, but look how they kept going because they believed in Allah. Look how they kept mobilizing when people told them it was impossible. Look how they kept moving when the odds were against them. Look how they trusted that Allah had the outcome, so they always made themselves vehicles for change. Look how even when the whole world was against them, they kept going because they believed in Allah. Oh, sweet smelling soul, come let me show you the best outcome. فَادْخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي وَادْخُلِي جَنَّتِي.
Thank you everybody for watching this. So inshallah we'll start the question and answer session. So yes, you can scan the QR code to register. The event, as I said, is free, but we do want everybody to register. Not only register, take a picture and share it with your group, in your WhatsApp group, with your family. And this is on February of 8th. And the venue would be there when you scan the code. So Brother Weil would be going around, whoever has the question, even from the ladies' side and gents' side. And inshallah, we would try to wrap this up in 10 minutes. And most likely we plan to have a qiyam, if I understand correctly. Yeah.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Adam Benny here, and I want to make a couple of comments, and I'm so glad Brother Mohamed has brought up really important issues. One regarding the myth about different political spectrums and how we need to navigate that in order to benefit our community. And two, regarding advocacy and civic engagement. If I may first, tackle the issue of advocacy and civic engagement. I've been in this country for 35 years, and from my observation, I've observed and witnessed that us as Muslim immigrants who came to Canada, one of the things that we've been told over and over again, that we need to be skeptical of Canadian political process. So again, and I even hear it until today. Many of us immigrants who come to this country, we come from a background where perhaps we've experienced, persecution, governments who have been oppressing freedom of speech, ideas, our faith, and so on and so forth. And we bring that experience into Canada. And when we actually look at the political system in here, and again with misguided directions from, unfortunately, some of the leaders in our community, so those brothers and sisters that I talk to, they keep saying, Adam, I'm not going to vote. I don't want to vote. I don't believe in the system. I don't think my vote will ever make any difference. And I'm just going to sit on the side because I don't believe in all of them. And then, frankly, some of those individuals are brainwashed with the idea that because this system is not Islamic, because it's secular and so on and so forth, you know what, we need to stay away. We need to be skeptical, because it's not going to serve our Islamic identity. And if anything, it is going to actually work against our Islamic identity. For me, that is the definition of shooting yourself in the foot and being self-marginalized. And I want to be frank about that. If we ever want to and I'm so glad that you bring up this issue, because if we ever want to mobilize ourselves, and you just mentioned that we are disorganized, and it's not we're disorganized because we don't have the skills or we don't have the money, we don't have the power, except that I think that we need to learn about how the Canadian system works. And I can tell everybody here that the only way that we can be able to make any kind of tangible impact, right, and help our brothers and sisters in Palestine is to work within the system. To stay outside of the system is like giving up, or to give power to those Islamophobe and anti-Palestinians, right? Power on a silver platter. That's exactly what we're doing. And let me give you an example, brother. In 2015, right, we decided to vote en masse against the Conservative Party. And by the way, I am a conservative. I've always been a conservative. I will always be a conservative. Just simply ideologically, that's what I identify myself with. And I'm also a nomination contestant, and I'm running for the Conservative Party in London West as well. But beside that point, what I believe that we should do is that again, you mentioned we need to have an impact, and we need to be able to put our politicians under pressure, right? But but the way we project, our power, I think we need to also keep what is called sharat ma'awiyah, if you know what I'm talking about, is that we should never again give a fatwa against a specific political party, but rather keep the pressure and keep engaging, because we never know who is going to form the next government. And this talk about, Pierre might be like even worse than Trudeau and so on and so forth, again, these are speculative, right? And these are all speculations.
So,
in a 5 minutes. So that's one issue. And I think we should look at it in a different way.
We don't have 5 minutes. We have 10 seconds to you, so
wrap up. Okay. And here's the thing. I would love, this organization to actually have a seminar and to teach and lecture all of us here, right? And specifically those who are newcomers in Canada, about Canadian political system, federally, provincially, and municipality, so we can be able to engage ourselves properly. We need to learn how Canadian political system works, so we can be able to make a difference from inside the political system and not from outside the political system. And I think, in my view, that's how we can make a difference. That's how they play the game, and that's how we need to play the game. And thank you, Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that the question is brief, not a comment. Yeah. So we have more questions. Brother Ashur will answer this one, and then we will have 3 more. Okay. So do you have anything to add to? Okay.
السلام عليكم. أنا مش هقول الكلام دوت بالإنجليزي، أنا هقوله بالعربي وحضرتك بقى تترجمه. حضرتك نصحت اللي احنا بمعنى بسيط اللي احنا نوقع ترودو الفترة الجاية، وأنا تماما متفق معاك. في نفس الوقت أنا عاوز أضيف تكملة اللي أنت بتقوله، اللي احنا نتفق على حد معين كلنا، إن شاء الله نكسب صوتين مقعدين بس في البرلمان، إن شاء الله يكون الحزب دوت آخر حزب وأصغر حزب في كندا، لازم نقف وراه عشان يعرفوا اللي المسلمين هم اللي كسبوا دول. الأخ هو بيتكلم على بيقول بوليفي ممكن يكون رؤيتنا ليه اللي هو رؤية مش صحيحة. لا للأسف هو إنسان بيكره المسلمين جدا جدا جدا، بيكره المسلمين جدا جدا. أنا مش هزود عن كده. شكرا.
Assalamu alaikum. It will be a brief, just to comment quickly. We should put our identity as Muslims in front of any other ideas we have. It doesn't matter what party you believe in, we should put our Islam first. And that's the problem. When we go with one party or another, you should see, this is what you see if you go to Israel, for example, or even if lobbies that you mentioned in US, right? They all, seculars, left, right, far left, far right, all of them agree on a basic point. We should support, our country in that tragedy. They call it a tragedy, even though we are the one who are slaughtered. We are the one who are actually, are being genocide by that army. So if you believe in any idea, I don't care. It's up to you. But again, put your Islam first. Because actually we're, first of all, brothers because we're Muslims, not because of what we believe, what party we are in. Second point, I believe the story that you said, you went to this mosque or that mosque, it's trust. I don't think we have enough trust in each, that mosque believes in that imam and that mosque believes in another imam. This is where we all, come apart. We should actually agree on certain points, bigger points. It doesn't matter if you believe it, not all of them were, not all of Sahaba even were actually with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said, I'm going to sign, Hudaybiyah. But again, they followed the leader. So we all have different opinions, but again, we follow the leader. So trust, leadership, and I believe Islam before what we think is right or wrong. So thank you.
جزاكم الله خير.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
عليكم السلام.
I need to add up one point to the main subject or the main topic here, which is our unity. Just for an example, you may have heard about the Gaza, the Canadian government helping Gaza to reunify their families. By the way, this movement came after 900 Palestinians across the country. They united with each other, 900. It's not 1.8 million, 900 people. And they did this movement. And they got something, despite, I know, some of us doesn't like it, but our unity can make a big difference. Wallahi, it makes very, very big difference. I'm just adding up to what Brother Mohammed said, just to guys, wallah, we can do it. We can do it. That's it. Barakallah fikum jami'an.
الله يجزيك خير.
ثانك يو. جزاكم الله خير يا اخوه. الحقيقه كنت في شيكاغو وعندي تجربه في شيكاغو لمده حوالي 9 سنوات. I was in Chicago for like 9 years. وكنت في جمعيه اسلاميه الامريكيه هناك. انا كنت احد الممبر في الجمعيه الاسلاميه الامريكيه. الحقيقه الشغل بتاعهم انا لي حوالي 6 سنوات هنا في كندا is completely different from here. يعني either Mac or this masjid or يعني سبحان الله. I remember 2009 in regard of Siyam and Eid and سبحان الله the imams they collect themselves and just take one opinion. سبحان الله and الآن implemented over all Chicago and we have 81 masjid, all of them follow one opinion. الحمد لله يعني solved like from everything in يعني your point we have to collect ourselves. This is the most important thing. الله سبحانه وتعالى في آيات محكمات يعني قطعيات قصي كما قلت الآن يعني واعتصم بحبل الله جميعا واحد يعني مختلف لي خطر لحية ولا في خطر قاسي أشياء يعني سبحان الله يفترض احنا كمسلمين خاصة في كندا يعني المفروض نتجاوز هذه الأمور يعني قاسي خلاص يا أخي يعني أمور يعني أشبعت بحثا يعني والخلاف فيها لا والله نقول قاس الله أعلم. أنا ماني فقيه لكن أرى قاسي حيعطل حركتنا هنا يعني. الحاجة الثانية بس بالنسبة للعمل السياسي هنا أنا شفت شيكاغو عملوا كوميتي and they are 9 members and they talk with the government. سبحان الله we trust these people. They talk with the government يعني we can reach يعني like يعني some point with the government يعني. لكن في نقطة يعني نقولها للشيخ واكد عليها قصد إن سبحان الله يعني we need يعني even in this organization we need some people who knows the Sharia because if even the politics should be directed by the Sharia because there's some people you don't look to the Sharia and يعني like take some opinions I mean political points, and finally they got on the trap, and again Sharia. أنا في شيكاغو سبحان الله 9 people, one of them he has doctorate PhD in Sharia, and they give them the opinion before they talk even with the government. So this is I know many people here they are back. Why? Because they think even the political العمل السياسي they think this is not haram, and some people they I remember in Chicago when I was there in the period of Obama and Trump, most of the community Muslim they fought for Biden and Trump, and you see what's happened now. I know my friends they blame themselves for fought for this Biden. Subhanallah, and they ask the Sharia committee, and I mean about why we have to follow you. We follow you, and we fought for Biden, and he did what he did. And last point, the political issue should be start from we have to form Islamic party, small Islamic party, something under the umbrella of all this I mean away from the umbrella of others. Because even how to learn the Islam, I mean the political work, we can't learn the political even this country without we have youth communities like this. We have to we have to have our own party. And we have to لازم نحاول ندير كوادرنا بنفسنا. لازم نحاول نأهل كوادرنا. نحن شخصيا انا نشوف اليوث هنا ولا واحد يفهم في العمل السياسي. انا نشوف انا في شيكاغو عندهم سبحان الله صح ما مش تحت الديمقراطيه، لكن دايرين منظمات خاصه بهم زي حزب فهمت، والحزب سبحان الله هذا هو اللي يقاسي يكون كوادر. وضع مهم جدا، لازم نفكروا نديروا حزب تحت حتى مثلا مظله مختلفه اذا كان هو هذا البي دي هذا بتاع الهنود ناقص شنو يفرق بعيننا؟ احنا ممكن نديروا بارتي مستقل وحدنا نربوا فيه كوادرنا السياسيه حتى بعين مستقل، وفي نفس الوقت مازال نكرر ان لا يمكن يكون في عمل سياسي without شريعه كوميتي، لازم يكون في شريعه كوميتي توجه، والا حيكون بعد فتره كثير من الناس حينفضوا عنك. وكثير من المسلمين الان المسلمين في هذه الكوميتي كلهم، وانا واحد منهم صراحه، قصدي دائما suspicious if there is not follow the Sharia law. I can't support these people.
We would like to wrap up because we have already 15
Okay.
minutes. Thank you so much, though. Brother Mohamed, if you want to do some concluding remarks or any questions you heard.
Yeah, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So, I think there is a lot of synthesis between a lot of the comments that were made. First, let me just translate briefly what was said by two of the brothers. One of the brothers was saying that he fundamentally agrees with this notion of uniting, and at the same time agrees with the idea that the Trudeau government should be rightfully punished for the position it's taken on this issue. At the same time, we as Muslims have to think beyond the Trudeau government and have proper succession planning and ensure that we are united, not just in our desire to send a message to the Trudeau government, but also what comes after that and how do we want to pursue our political objectives. And then the Sheikh just was talking about his experience in Chicago and how over there he over 9 years he really got the impression that the community there was quite organized. It was centralized. There was a committee comprised of 9 people, including a person with a PhD in Sharia, that represented the interests of the community. And because of this, they were very effective, and that this seems to be, from his perspective, lacking in London. Now, I would just say to try to kind of, like I said, synthesize the various points made, and without being repetitive with what was already said, I think the common denominator in all the comments is we all agree that we as a community need to be more united. Number 2, saying that you wish to send a message to a particular government does not mean that's the end. That's a means to the end, right? Very often our communities, if you go back to the Arab Spring in 2011, right? You see people who are very emotional in wanting to fix a problem
without necessarily putting in place the systems and mechanisms in order to think about what happens after you fix the problem and how do you deal with it afterwards, how do you deal with the power vacuum and so on. So as a community, we have to think about not just what is it going to take to, feel cathartic in delivering a humiliating defeat to somebody like Trudeau and sending him a message that our community won't stand up for what he's doing. But it can't be emotional. It has to be rational. It has to be thoughtful. Now, there are many ways to approach this. One way, for example, the Sheikh mentioned is maybe we as a community should think about having our own party that has its Islamic ideals embedded within it. The brother talked about how you have to be in the system in order to fix the system. There's many different approaches to this. And by the way, there isn't a single right answer at a single point in time, because things change, circumstances change, contexts change, even parties change. So I would slightly push back on the idea that I would be part of X or Y, Z party now and I will be in the future, because we don't know what that party may be in the future. If the Conservative Party calls tomorrow for some fascistic policies, I'm pretty sure you would disavow it. So this goes back to what Abu Mohamed was talking about here, which is we have to start at the very basic level with, I am loyal to Allah and His Messenger. Why did I come to Canada? Did I come here just so that I can, shovel snow a few months a year and, seek a better life? These are nice things, but ultimately, many of us here, especially those who are immigrants, carry what I like to call immigrant guilt. And immigrant guilt is the notion that you got out, but many of your relatives did not. And because you got out with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, هو اصطفاكم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء. It's a fadl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose you. My father is the youngest of 5 siblings. All of them were born and raised in Egypt. All of them stayed and lived in Egypt. He is the only one that decided to move to Saudi. At the time, Saudi was this desert, discovered oil. They're looking to hire a bunch of smart engineers. He's an engineer. Let me go and see, what وَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا. Let me go and see what Allah subhanahu. And then eventually decided to immigrate, and then we came here. So you don't know where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and why. And because of this, many of us feel this sense of guilt. That's why 50% of the $500 million raised in this country goes overseas. It's part of that connection to our home countries, the people that we left home, the families, the relatives, those who don't have the resources and the means. And that's a very understandable emotion. It's a very understandable emotion. But it's also important to understand that we can effect change here. Imagine if Muslims can organize and effect policy and send $14 billion of aid to Somalia and Ethiopia and Sudan and Syria and Afghanistan and so on and so forth, right? Taxpayer money. Imagine if Canadians here can effect policy that would send money to relief organizations and send money to address challenges that affect our families abroad, open up visa opportunities and programs and so on and so forth, right? So there are so many different ways to address the issue, and what's key is we have to have, to the brother's point, trust. We have to trust that there are وَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, right? This applies in deen, but it also applies in dunya. I'm not a physicist. So if somebody came here in the question and answer period and asked me a very advanced question about nuclear physics, and I started, running my mouth, I would just be talking, out of hot air. And it's not appropriate for me to start just because maybe I have an opinion or some thoughts. That's your opinion. And your opinion is fine. But my opinion in this subject, when I'm not a subject matter expert, would be no more valuable than anyone else's opinion in this room. Just similarly, just because somebody's a sheikh and a alim does not mean that their political analysis is going to be correct. And similarly, just because somebody's a great political analyst doesn't mean that they understand the aqidah and the fiqh. That's why these two have to cooperate, going back to what the sheikh is saying. You have to have people who sit at the table, who have the PhDs in public policy, who have the PhDs in political science, who understand the law of the land very well, who understand how to mobilize, who understand how to organize. But you also have to have the mashayikh on the table so that they can say, where are the red lines from a fiqh perspective, from an aqidah perspective, right? Where is there majal and opportunity, and where is there very clear, bright red lines that we can't as a community transgress. So I definitely don't want anybody to get the impression that this is a very emotional reaction to a particular government. No, this is saying two things that can both be true at the same time. You have a responsibility to send a message to a government that disrespects, disavows, and undervalues people who look like you. You have to send that government a message. And you also have to leverage your ample resources of wealth and population and capability to mobilize and solve the problems and replace poor governance, poor policy, angry and racist and fascist ideologies with good and righteous thinking and with programs and with a political policy, inshallah, that can be effective. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with love for one another, love for this deen, love for serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as our dear brother Sami said in that very short clip, we are honored by Islam. We don't give honor to Islam. Islam honors us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses people and uses them to give victory to the faith. And Allah promises to give victory to the faith. So the question is simple. Do you want to be one of those blessed people who Allah chose and gave the honor of a lifetime to be a vehicle for serving the faith? Or do you just want to be a spectator who watches the victory of Allah happen, because it will happen inshallah in our lifetime or at the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum everybody, and thank you for attending and staying up late. I don't know if there would be a qiyam. Because I don't see. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Inshallah, if anybody want to volunteer for CMPAC, who is organizing the event, you can contact me or Brother Weil, and we can add you to the WhatsApp group. As I said, we as a group are trying to have more engagement with public servants and MPs and MLAs, and basically hounding them every day, every week, and doing it in a very strategic way, not individually. And so if you are interested, do contact us and we will sign up.